Chapter 1: The Curse Under the Moonlight. In the desolate expanse of the Mesopotamian desert, where the sands whispered secrets older than empires, a chilling prophecy was born under the cold, unyielding gaze of the moon. The year was 260 CE, and the mighty Roman Empire, once an unassailable colossus that had tamed the known world, stood on the precipice of an unimaginable horror. The air was thick with omens, as if the gods themselves had turned their backs on Rome. In a shadowed temple carved into the cliffs of the Persian heartland, Zoroastrian priests chanted incantations that seemed to summon the very darkness of the cosmos. Their voices, low and resonant, wove a curse that foretold the fall of a great ruler, a man whose blood would stain the sands and whose shame would echo through the ages. This was no ordinary death. This was the ritualistic annihilation of an emperor, a calculated desecration of Rome's divine majesty, orchestrated by a Persian king whose ambition burned brighter than the fires of his sacred altars. The story of Emperor Publius Licinius Valerianus, known to history as Valeran, is not merely the tragedy of a man, but the shattering of an empire's soul. His fate, sealed beneath that moonlit sky, was a wound that would fester in the Roman psyche for centuries, a stark reminder that even the mightiest can fall when pride blinds them to the cunning of their enemies. This is the story of a collision between two civilizations at the zenith of their power, where the hubris of Rome met the ruthless brilliance of the Sassanid Persian Empire, led by the enigmatic Shapur I, the King of Kings. The Roman Empire of the 3rd century was a realm teetering on the edge of collapse, its grandeur marred by chaos that gnawed at its foundations like a ravenous beast. Historians call this era the crisis of the 3rd century, a period of unrelenting turmoil that saw the empire battered by internal strife and external threats. Between 235 and 284 CE, more than 20 emperors claimed the throne, their reigns often ending in blood-soaked betrayal or battlefield slaughter. Barbarian tribes pressed relentlessly against the northern frontiers, their axes gleaming with the promise of plunder. Economic collapse drained the empire's coffers, leaving provinces in disarray, while political intrigue festered in the marble halls of Rome. The empire was fracturing, its once unified territories splintering under the weight of ambition and desperation. Regional commanders declared themselves emperors, carving out petty kingdoms, while foreign enemies scented weakness and grew bold. Into this maelstrom stepped Valerian in 253 CE, a man whose weathered face bore the scars of countless campaigns and whose sharp mind had navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics. Unlike the fleeting emperors who preceded him, Valerian was no mere opportunist. A seasoned senator and military commander, he had governed provinces, led legions, and earned the respect of his peers through decades of service. To the war-weary citizens of Rome, he was a beacon of hope, a steady hand to guide the empire through its darkest hour. His ascension was heralded with cautious optimism, as if the gods had finally granted Rome a champion capable of restoring its lost glory. Yet beneath the pomp of his coronation, the shadows of fate were already gathering. Valerian's reign began with a bold vision: to reunite the fractured empire and reassert Rome's dominance over its enemies. Recognizing the impossibility of governing the sprawling empire alone, he appointed his son, Gallienus, as co-emperor, a pragmatic division of power that reflected his strategic acumen. Gallienus would hold the western provinces, fending off Germanic invasions along the Rhine, while Valerian turned his gaze eastward to the rising threat of the Sassanid Persian Empire. The eastern frontier was the empire's lifeblood, a region of unparalleled wealth and strategic importance. Syria, with its bustling cities and trade routes linking the Mediterranean to the riches of Asia, was the jewel of Rome's eastern possessions. Its loss would be more than a military defeat. It would be an economic catastrophe, a death knell for an empire already staggering under the weight of its own ambitions. The Sassanid Empire, forged in 224 CE when Ardashir I overthrew the Parthian dynasty, was no mere barbarian horde. It was a sophisticated civilization with imperial aspirations to rival Rome's own. Under Ardashir's son, Shapur I, the Persians had transformed into a formidable adversary, their armies disciplined, their strategies innovative, and their ambitions boundless. Shapur, known in Persian as Shahanshah, King of Kings, was a ruler whose very presence seemed to bend the will of those around him. His dark eyes, said to pierce the souls of men, concealed a mind that wove plans as intricate as the tapestries adorning his palace in Ctesiphon. Raised in the shadow of his father's conquests, Shapur had learned the art of war from the cradle, absorbing lessons from Persian tradition, Roman administration, and Greek philosophy. He was not content to merely defend his father's legacy. He dreamed of resurrecting the glory of the Achaemenid Empire, the ancient Persian dominion that had once humbled the world. Shapur's genius lay not only in his military prowess, but in his mastery of psychological warfare. He understood that true victory required more than the slaughter of armies. It demanded the destruction of an enemy's spirit, the obliteration of their symbols of power. His early campaigns against Rome had already proven his mettle, capturing key cities like Nisibis and Carrhae and sowing rebellion among Rome's eastern vassals. Persian chroniclers described him as a figure of divine favor, a warrior king blessed by Ahura Mazda, the Zoroastrian god of light and truth. His capital at Ctesiphon glittered with the spoils of conquest, its halls filled with scholars, artists, and architects who transformed it into a beacon of Persian culture. Yet beneath this veneer of sophistication lay a ruthlessness that would soon etch Shapur's name into the annals of infamy. The Eastern campaign that would define Valerian's fate was born of necessity. The Sassanid threat had grown too dire to ignore, their incursions threatening to unravel Rome's grip on its eastern territories. Valerian, with the weight of an empire on his shoulders, resolved to lead the campaign himself, a decision that spoke to both his courage and his hubris. Roman legions fought with unmatched ferocity when led by their emperor, and Valerian believed his presence would rally his troops and send a message of defiance to Shapur. The emperor assembled what contemporaries called the finest army of the 3rd century, a glittering host drawn from every corner of the empire. Veteran legions, hardened by years of border wars, marched alongside elite cavalry and auxiliary units, their armor gleaming under the Syrian sun. Propaganda from the imperial court trumpeted the campaign as the definitive solution to the Persian problem, a crusade to restore Rome's dominion and silence its enemies. Yet, as the Roman army crossed the Euphrates, the sands of Mesopotamia seemed to whisper warnings of their own. The desert was not merely a battlefield, it was a crucible where empires were forged or broken. Valerian, for all his experience, could not have foreseen the trap that awaited him, a snare woven not just with steel, but with the cunning of a king who saw the world as a chessboard and himself as its master. The priests' chants under the moonlight, their voices rising like smoke into the night sky, seemed to carry a message that only Shapur understood. The curse they invoked was not just for Valerian, but for the very idea of Roman invincibility. The emperor marched toward his destiny, unaware that each step brought him closer to a nightmare that would haunt the Roman world for generations. The stage was set for a confrontation that would transcend the clash of armies. This was a battle of wills, of ideologies, of civilizations locked in a struggle for supremacy. Shapur did not merely seek to defeat Rome, he sought to humiliate it, to strip away the veneer of divine favor that cloaked its emperors and exposed the fragility beneath. Valerian, with his dreams of glory, believed he could bend the Persian king to his will, just as Rome had subdued countless foes before. But Shapur was no ordinary adversary. His ambition was not to conquer land alone, but to rewrite the story of the ancient world, to etch his name in blood and fire across the pages of history. The prophecy under the moonlight was no idle superstition. It was a declaration of intent, a promise that the King of Kings would bring low the mightiest of Rome's rulers. As Valerian's army marched deeper into Persian territory, the desert seemed to close around them, its silence broken only by the distant howl of jackals and the faint, eerie chant of priests whose words carried the weight of divine wrath. The emperor, clad in the purple robes of his office, stood at the head of his legions, his heart filled with the fire of Roman pride. But the sands of Mesopotamia cared little for pride, and the moon that watched over them bore witness to a truth as old as time. No empire, no matter how great, is immune to the cruelty of fate. In the days that followed, the Roman army would face trials that tested the limits of human endurance. Disease, hunger, and the relentless cunning of Shapur's forces would erode their strength, turning their march of triumph into a desperate struggle for survival. Valerian, the man who had dreamed of restoring Rome's glory, would find himself ensnared in a web of treachery and ambition, his fate sealed by a king who understood that true power lay not in conquest, but in the destruction of hope. The curse under the moonlight was not just a warning, it was a prelude to a horror that would shake the foundations of the ancient world, a tale of pride, betrayal, and a death so gruesome that it would become a legend whispered in fear across continents. As the stars wheeled above the desert, the priests' chants faded into the night, but their prophecy lingered, a shadow cast across the sands. Valerian's doom was not yet written, but the hand of fate was already moving, guided by a king whose vision of empire demanded the ultimate sacrifice. The story of Valerian's fall had begun, and with it, the unraveling of an empire's myth of invincibility.
Chapter 2. Trap in the Desert. The sun blazed mercilessly over the endless dunes of Mesopotamia, its heat a crucible that forged both heroes and tragedies. In the spring of 256 CE, the Roman Empire's finest army marched eastward, their banners fluttering like the wings of a wounded eagle, their armor glinting with the promise of glory. At their head rode Emperor Publius Licinius Valerianus, a man whose name was whispered with reverence in the halls of Rome. His legions, forged in the fires of countless campaigns, were hailed as the empire's sharpest blade, a force that would carve Rome's dominance into the heart of Persia. Yet, beneath the shimmering mirage of their confidence, the sands concealed a trap as cunning as it was deadly, woven by a king whose shadow stretched far beyond the battlefield. Shapur I, the King of Kings, known to his enemies as the Hunter in the Dark, watched from afar, his eyes gleaming with the patience of a predator, awaiting the perfect moment to strike. The desert was no mere backdrop to this clash of empires. It was a living entity, a merciless arbiter that tested the will of men and the strength of nations. As Valerian's army crossed the Euphrates, the air grew thick with the weight of destiny, as if the very winds carried the echoes of the Zoroastrian priest's moonlit curse. The emperor, clad in the purple cloak of imperial authority, believed he was marching toward triumph, a campaign that would silence the Sassanid threat and restore Rome's fading glory. But Shapur, with his uncanny genius for war, had no intention of meeting Rome's legions in open battle. His was a strategy of shadows, of attrition, of 1,000 unseen cuts that would bleed the Roman war machine dry before it ever reached the heart of his empire. Valerian's campaign began with the fanfare of imperial ambition. The Roman army, a mosaic of veteran legions, elite cavalry, and auxiliary units from distant provinces, was a sight to behold. Chroniclers of the time described it as a river of steel flowing through the desert, its disciplined ranks stretching to the horizon. The emperor had spared no expense, drawing troops from the Rhine, the Danube, and the African frontiers, each soldier a testament to Rome's enduring might. Propaganda from the imperial court painted Valerian as a new Alexander, a conqueror destined to crush the Persian menace and restore the eastern provinces to Rome. The cities of Syria, with their bustling markets and strategic trade routes, were the prize, their wealth the lifeblood that could staunch the empire's economic wounds. To lose them would be to invite collapse, a truth Valerian understood with the clarity of a man who had seen empires rise and fall. The initial phases of the campaign seemed to justify Rome's confidence. Valerian's forces swept through northern Mesopotamia, relieving besieged cities and restoring imperial control over disputed territories. The emperor's methodical approach, honed by years of provincial command, emphasized careful logistics and coordinated maneuvers. Fortresses were reinforced, supply lines secured, and local chieftains brought to heel with a mix of diplomacy and steel. Roman soldiers, their morale bolstered by their emperor's presence, marched with the swagger of men who believed victory was inevitable. Yet, beneath this veneer of success, cracks were already forming. The desert, with its relentless heat and choking dust, began to exact its toll. Water was scarce, and the supply convoys, stretching back to Roman-held Syria, were vulnerable to the hit-and-run tactics of Persian raiders. Shapur, the hunter in the dark, was no ordinary foe. Unlike the barbarian tribes Rome had subdued with brute force or bought off with gold, the Sassanid king wielded an army as disciplined as it was innovative. His cavalry, swift and deadly, struck like lightning, vanishing into the dunes before the Romans could respond. His spies, cloaked in the guise of merchants and nomads, infiltrated Roman camps, sowing disinformation and mapping supply routes. Persian chroniclers later boasted of Shapur's foresight, describing how he studied Roman tactics, learning their strengths and exploiting their weaknesses. He understood that Rome's legions thrived in set-piece battles, their heavy infantry and tight formations a hammer that had crushed countless enemies. But in the vastness of the desert, where supply lines stretched thin and the terrain favored mobility, Rome's hammer was blunted. The Persian king's strategy was one of patience and precision. Rather than confront Valerian's army head-on, Shapur drew them deeper into Persian territory, stretching their resources to the breaking point. His forces avoided major battles, striking only at vulnerable supply convoys and isolated detachments before melting away into the desert. The Romans, accustomed to the disciplined warfare of European battlefields, found themselves outmaneuvered by an enemy that seemed to materialize from the sands themselves. They were like ghosts, one Roman soldier's account later recorded, striking in the night and leaving only dust and death. Shapur's cavalry, armed with composite bows and clad in scale armor, harassed the Roman flanks, their arrows raining down with lethal precision. The Roman supply trains, laden with grain and water, became prime targets, their escorts cut down in ambushes that left no survivors to tell the tale. As the campaign dragged on, a new and more insidious enemy emerged: disease. The plague of Cyprian, a merciless epidemic that had already ravaged the empire's urban centers, found fertile ground in the cramped, unsanitary conditions of the Roman camp. The soldiers called it the curse of the gods, a pestilence that turned strong men into fevered shadows, their bodies racked with pain under the unrelenting sun. The disease spread like wildfire, claiming thousands and leaving many more too weak to lift their swords. The Roman camp, once a bastion of order, descended into chaos, its tents filled with the moans of the dying and the stench of decay. Valerian, though a seasoned commander, could do little to stem the tide. Some whispered that he too had fallen ill, his face pale and drawn beneath his imperial helmet, though he refused to show weakness before his men. Valerian's methodical logistics began to crumble. Supply shortages forced the soldiers onto half rations, their strength sapped by hunger and exhaustion. The desert, with its endless dunes and treacherous mirages, became a labyrinth of despair. Roman morale, once buoyed by the promise of glory, began to falter. The soldiers spoke in hushed tones of the hunter in the dark, a near mythical figure whose very name seemed to summon fear. Shapur's forces, ever elusive, struck at will, their raids leaving behind trails of blood and broken Roman pride. The siege of Nisibis, a strategically vital city, became a microcosm of the campaign's woes. What should have been a swift victory dragged on for months, the Persian defenders employing sophisticated countermeasures that frustrated Roman siege engines. Shapur's relief forces, operating in small, mobile units, prevented the Romans from establishing effective siege lines, turning the operation into a grueling war of attrition.
The psychological toll was as devastating as the physical. The Romans, bred on tales of their own invincibility, began to question their emperor's leadership. Valerian, once seen as Rome's salvation, now faced murmurs of doubt among his officers. His careful strategies, so effective in the empire's western provinces, seemed ill-suited to the fluid, unpredictable warfare of the desert. The soldiers, parched and weary, clung to the fading hope of a decisive battle that would restore their honor. But Shapur, with his predator's instinct, had no intention of granting them such a mercy. His strategy was to bleed the Romans slowly, to let the desert and disease do what his arrows could not. The longer Valerian's army remained in hostile territory, the more vulnerable it became, its once mighty ranks reduced to a shadow of their former glory. By the summer of 260 CE, the Roman position had become desperate. The army, decimated by plague and hunger, was surrounded by an increasingly confident Persian force. The desert, once a mere obstacle, had become a prison, its sands a silent witness to Rome's unraveling dreams. Valerian, his options dwindling, made a fateful decision that would seal his doom. In a moment of desperation, or perhaps a fatal miscalculation, he requested a parley with Shapur, hoping to negotiate terms for a Roman withdrawal. The emperor, steeped in the traditions of Roman honor, may have believed that his imperial dignity would protect him, that the ancient customs of warfare would ensure his safety. But Shapur played by no such rules. The hunter in the dark saw not an emperor, but a trophy, a living symbol of Rome's vulnerability. The meeting was arranged on neutral ground, a barren stretch of desert between the two armies. The Roman delegation, a small retinue of senior officers and bodyguards, approached under a white banner of truce, their armor dulled by dust and weariness. Persian officials, their faces unreadable, insisted on elaborate ceremonial protocols that should have raised suspicion. But Valerian, driven by the hope of salvaging his campaign, pressed forward, his heart heavy with the weight of an empire's expectations. The air was still, the silence broken only by the distant cry of a vulture circling above. As the emperor dismounted, his eyes met Shapur's, and for a fleeting moment he may have sensed the trap, but it was too late. The Persian king, resplendent in his golden armor, stood at the center of a carefully orchestrated ambush. His guards, hidden among the dunes, moved with the precision of a well-rehearsed dance, surrounding the Roman delegation in an instant. Valerian's bodyguards, outnumbered and caught off guard, were cut down in a flurry of steel and blood. The emperor himself, according to some accounts, drew his sword in a final act of defiance, but the outcome was never in doubt. The hunter in the dark had sprung his trap, and the mightiest man in Rome was now his prisoner. The psychological blow was immediate and catastrophic. Roman troops, learning of their emperor's capture, began to surrender en masse or fled in disarray, their disciplined ranks dissolving into a chaotic rout. Shapur's triumph was not merely military, it was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. He did not execute Valerian on the spot, as a lesser conqueror might have done. Instead, he preserved his imperial prize for a fate far more devastating, a spectacle that would reduce the symbol of Rome to a humiliated relic. The emperor was stripped of his purple cloak and bound in chains, his imperial regalia cast into the dust. Persian chroniclers later described the scene with relish. Valerian, the man who had dared to challenge the King of Kings, knelt before his captor, his head bowed into the weight of his failure. The desert, silent and unforgiving, bore witness to the moment when Rome's pride was shattered. The trap in the desert was more than a military defeat. It was the prelude to a nightmare that would haunt the Roman Empire for centuries. Shapur, with his predator's cunning, had not only captured an emperor, but had set the stage for a humiliation that would transcend the battlefield. The sands of Mesopotamia, stained with Roman blood, whispered of a new era, one where the hunter in the dark would wield power not just over men, but over the very soul of an empire. Valerian, now a captive in a foreign land, faced a fate that would make the horrors of the desert seem merciful by comparison. The curse under the moonlight, chanted by the Zoroastrian priests, had come to pass, and its shadow would soon engulf the emperor in a darkness from which there was no escape.
Chapter 3. The Humiliation of an Emperor. The sun had set on the Roman Empire's pride, its golden rays replaced by the cold, mocking light of Persian torches. In the heart of the Sassanid Empire, amidst the opulent halls of Quithophon, Emperor Publius Licinius Valerianus, once the master of the known world, stood in chains, his imperial dignity reduced to ashes. The year was 260 CE, and the desert trap that had ensnared him marked not the end but the beginning of a torment designed to shatter the very soul of Rome. Shapur I, the hunter in the dark, had not merely captured a man, he had seized a symbol, a living trophy to be molded into a grotesque monument of Persian triumph. The emperor's fall was no fleeting moment of defeat, it was a meticulously crafted spectacle, a psychological assault that would reverberate through the ages, etching fear and shame into the heart of an empire. The air in Quithophon was heavy with the scent of incense and victory, as Persian nobles gathered to witness the unthinkable. A Roman emperor, stripped of his purple robes, kneeling before the King of Kings. Valerian's capture had sent shockwaves through his army, transforming disciplined legions into a scattered rabble, fleeing or surrendering under the weight of despair. But Shapur, with the precision of a master sculptor, saw in his prisoner an opportunity far greater than military conquest. To kill Valerian was to grant him the mercy of oblivion. To keep him alive, to parade him as a broken relic, was to strike at the very myth of Roman invincibility. The hunter in the dark understood that true power lay not in the clash of swords, but in the destruction of an enemy's spirit, and he wielded this knowledge with a cruelty that was both calculated and profound. The emperor's humiliation began the moment his chains were forged. Stripped of his imperial regalia, the golden eagle, the purple cloak, the laurel crown that marked him as Rome's divine ruler, Valerian was clad in the coarse garb of a common servant. His wrists, once adorned with the rings of authority, were bound with iron, his every movement a reminder of his fallen status. Persian chroniclers, their quills dripping with pride, recorded the scene with vivid detail. The emperor, his once proud visage hollowed out by hunger and defeat, was led through the streets of Quithophon, a spectacle for the jeering crowds. Children threw stones, merchants spat at his feet, and nobles mocked the man who had dared to challenge their king. Yet this was merely the prelude to a degradation that would sear itself into the annals of history. Shapur's genius lay in his ability to transform Valerian's suffering into a weapon of propaganda. The emperor was not confined to a dungeon, as one might expect of a defeated foe. Instead,
he was kept in quarters that mocked his former grandeur, comfortable enough to sustain his life, but deliberately designed to strip away his dignity. His meals, served on rough pottery rather than the silver platters befitting an emperor, were a daily reminder of his servitude. His chambers, though clean, were adorned with symbols of Persian supremacy, tapestries depicting Sassanid victories, their vibrant threads weaving tales of Roman defeat. Every detail of his captivity was a calculated insult, a chisel chipping away at the edifice of Roman pride. The most infamous of Shapur's humiliations was the use of Valerian as a human footstool, a ritual that inverted the sacred ceremonies of Rome. In the imperial court, subjects knelt before the emperor, their heads bowed in reverence. In Quithophon, it was Valerian who knelt, his back bent under the weight of Shapur's boot as the king mounted his horse. The image was seared into the minds of all who witnessed it, a grotesque parody of imperial power. Persian artisans, their hands guided by Shapur's vision, immortalized the scene in stone reliefs and vibrant paintings, ensuring that the emperor's shame would endure long after his death. These artworks, displayed in Quithophon's grand halls and sent as diplomatic gifts to allied kingdoms, were more than mere propaganda. They were declarations of a new world order, where Persia, not Rome, held sway. The psychological torment extended beyond physical degradation. Shapur, a devout Zoroastrian, saw himself as the champion of Ahura Mazda, the god of light and truth, tasked with purging the world of chaos. To him, Valerian was not just a defeated enemy, but a symbol of Roman hubris, a foreign contaminant that threatened the divine order. The emperor was forced to participate in Zoroastrian fire ceremonies, sacred rituals that were anathema to his Roman sensibilities. Contemporary accounts, though debated by modern historians, describe Valerian standing before blazing altars, compelled to offer obeisance to Persian deities. Each act of submission was a dagger to his soul, a violation of the very principles that defined his identity as Rome's ruler. The priests, their eyes gleaming with zeal, chanted hymns of purification as if Valerian's presence in their sacred spaces could cleanse the land of Roman taint.
Shapur's treatment of his imperial captive was not random cruelty. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. By reducing Valerian to a servant, he dismantled the mystique of Roman imperial power, a myth that had sustained the empire through centuries of conquest. The emperor's humiliation was a message to the world. Rome, for all its legions and grandeur, was mortal, its emperors no more divine than the men they ruled. Persian scribes recorded Shapur's words to his court. "The eagle of Rome has been plucked, its wings broken. Let all nations see what becomes of those who defy the King of Kings." The message was clear, and its impact was profound, reaching far beyond the walls of Ctesiphon to the courts of distant kingdoms. The emperor's captivity, which lasted several years, was a carefully orchestrated campaign of degradation. Valerian was paraded at state banquets, his presence a grim reminder of Persian dominance. Foreign ambassadors, their eyes wide with shock, were invited to witness the fallen emperor, their reports carrying the tale of his shame to every corner of the known world. Shapur, ever the strategist, used these displays to extract concessions from Rome's allies, who now questioned the empire's ability to protect them. The emperor's body, though kept alive, was treated as a canvas for Persian artistry. His clothing, deliberately tattered, was a mockery of Roman splendor. His movements, restricted by chains, were a constant reminder of his powerlessness. Even his speech, once the command of legions, was silenced, his words ignored by the Persian court that now dictated his fate. The cultural significance of Valerian's humiliation cannot be overstated. In the ancient world, the treatment of captured rulers was a political act, a statement of supremacy that resonated across civilizations. By reducing Valerian to a plaything, Shapur declared that Persia had surpassed Rome in the hierarchy of nations. The emperor's suffering was not personal. It was a spectacle designed to reshape the ancient world's perception of power. Persian poets and storytellers wove tales of Shapur's triumph, their verses celebrating the hunter in the dark as a divine avenger. These stories, passed down through generations, became foundational myths of the Sassanid dynasty, cementing Shapur's legacy as a ruler who had humbled the mightiest empire of the age. The psychological impact on Valerian himself is difficult to fathom. A man who had once commanded the loyalty of millions, who had walked the marble halls of Rome as a living god, was now a prisoner in a foreign land, his every action a testament to his defeat. Some sources suggest he clung to hope, whispering prayers to Jupiter in the darkness of his chambers, dreaming of rescue by his son Galenius. Others paint a bleaker picture, a man broken by years of torment, his spirit eroded by the relentless cruelty of his captors. Whatever the truth, Valerian's ordeal was a slow death, a prelude to the ultimate horror that awaited him. Shapur, with the patience of a predator, kept his prisoner alive for a purpose yet to be revealed, a final act that would transcend humiliation and enter the realm of legend. The desert, silent and watchful, bore witness to the slow unraveling of an emperor, its sands whispering of a fate that would soon be written in blood.
Chapter 4. The Ritual of Horror. In the shadowed heart of Ctesiphon, where the flickering flames of Zoroastrian altars cast their eerie glow, a spectacle of unimaginable cruelty was about to unfold. The year was 262 CE, and Emperor Publius Licinius Valerianus, once the divine ruler of Rome, had become a hollowed shell of the man he once was. His years of captivity under the iron grip of Shapur I, the hunter in the dark, had stripped him of dignity, reducing him to a living emblem of Roman defeat. Yet the Persian king's ambition reached beyond mere humiliation. Shapur sought not just to break an emperor, but to craft a legend, a grotesque masterpiece that would echo through the ages as a testament to Persian supremacy. The ritual that awaited Valerian was no mere execution. It was a macabre dance of pain and power, a ceremony designed to purge the land of Roman arrogance and cement Shapur's divine mandate. This was the ritual of horror, the flaying alive of an emperor, a moment where human suffering became a canvas for political triumph. The desert night was still, the air heavy with the scent of myrrh and the distant wail of ceremonial horns. In a vast courtyard before Ctesiphon's grandest temple, a crowd of Persian nobles, priests, and foreign ambassadors gathered, their faces illuminated by torchlight, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. The stage was set with chilling precision. A raised platform, adorned with Zoroastrian symbols of fire and purity, stood at the center, its edges lined with braziers that spat embers into the darkness. Valerian, his body frail from years of torment, was led forward in chains, his once proud gaze now dulled by despair. The crowd parted like a sea, their whispers rising like a tide of dread. The emperor, clad in tattered robes that mocked his former glory, stood as the focal point of a ritual that would transcend mortality, a sacrifice to the gods and a warning to empires. Shapur I, resplendent in robes of gold and crimson, presided over the scene like a deity of vengeance. His presence was magnetic, his every gesture imbued with the authority of a king chosen by Ahura Mazda. The hunter in the dark had waited years for this moment, prolonging Valerian's suffering to ensure that his final act would carry the weight of divine judgment. The decision to end the emperor's life was not born of haste or anger, but of cold calculation. Persian sources, their words preserved in ancient inscriptions, suggest that Shapur chose the moment when Valerian's health began to falter, ensuring that the emperor would be conscious and aware during his final ordeal. To let him die of illness or age would be to rob the ritual of its power. To flay him alive was to weave his agony into the fabric of Persian mythology. The act of flaying alive, known in Persian as kandan-e-pust, the removal of the skin, was no mere execution. It was a sacred rite, rooted in the ancient traditions of Zoroastrianism and its pre-Zoroastrian forebearers. In the Persian worldview, the skin was a vessel of worldly corruption, a barrier between the soul and the divine purity of Ahura Mazda. By stripping it away, the executioners believed they were cleansing the land of Roman defilement, offering Valerian's suffering as a sacrifice to restore cosmic order. The ritual was steeped in symbolism, each cut a prayer, each cry a hymn to Persian victory. Shapur, standing before the altar, declared the act a divine mandate, his voice resonating with the certainty of a prophet. The enemy of light shall be purified in pain, his flesh a testament to the triumph of truth. The preparations for the ritual spanned days, each step a deliberate escalation of terror. Valerian was subjected to a series of preliminary rites, designed to both weaken and sanctify him for the ordeal. He was bathed in ritual oils, his body shaved of hair to ease the executioner's task, and his skin anointed with substances that would make it pliable yet prolong his suffering. The emperor, once a symbol of Rome's unyielding strength, was reduced to a ceremonial object, his humanity stripped away with each ritual act. Persian priests, their robes adorned with sacred emblems, chanted incantations that mingled with the smoke rising from the braziers, their voices a haunting counterpoint to Valerian's silent dread. The emperor, though his eyes clouded with exhaustion, flickered with the last embers of defiance, as if he still clung to the hope that Rome's gods might intervene.
The flaying began at dawn, as the first rays of sunlight pierced the horizon, a cruel irony for a man who would never see another day. The executioners, chosen for their skill and precision, were not mere butchers, but artisans of pain, trained in techniques passed down through generations. Their blades, honed to razor sharpness, gleamed in the morning light as they made the first incisions. The process was methodical, almost surgical, beginning with the extremities, fingers, toes, and facial features, before moving to the larger expanses of the body. Each cut was designed to maximize pain, while keeping Valerian alive, his consciousness a canvas for their artistry. The crowd, silent at first, watched in horrid rapture as the emperor's skin was peeled away, layer by layer, his screams tearing through the stillness like a storm. Valerian's agony was not just physical, it was a public desecration, a spectacle meant to sear itself into the minds of all who witnessed it. Persian nobles, their faces masks of grim satisfaction, stood alongside ambassadors from distant lands, Parthians, Indians, and even emissaries from the far-off Han Empire, whose reports would carry the tale of Rome's humiliation to the ends of the earth. Shapur, his gaze unyielding, ensured that every detail of the ritual was observed, each moment a stroke in his masterpiece of propaganda. The emperor's cries, raw and primal, were not merely sounds of suffering, but a symphony of Persian triumph, a message that no empire, no matter how great, could withstand the wrath of the hunter in the dark. The process, which lasted hours, was a study in controlled cruelty. The executioners worked with a precision that bordered on reverence, their blades tracing patterns that mirrored the sacred geometries of Zoroastrian art. Valerian, bound to the platform, could do nothing but endure, his body trembling as shock and blood loss pushed him toward the edge of oblivion. Some accounts claim he whispered prayers to Jupiter, others that he cursed Shapur with his dying breath, but all agree that he remained conscious far longer than any man should have. The ritual was not meant to end quickly. It was a performance, a deliberate prolongation of suffering that served as both punishment and proclamation. When death finally came, likely from the overwhelming trauma of blood loss and shock, it was marked by a solemn silence, broken only by the priest's chants offering thanks to Ahura Mazda for delivering the enemy into Persian hands. The aftermath of Valerian's execution was as calculated as the act itself. His body, now a lifeless husk, was subjected to further indignities to prevent any possibility of Roman reverence. The corpse was dismembered, its parts distributed among Persian nobles as trophies, ensuring that no single relic could become a shrine for Roman vengeance. The emperor's skin, however, was reserved for a far more sinister purpose. Persian craftsmen, skilled in the ancient art of leatherwork, treated the skin with chemicals to preserve its form, a process that required both expertise and a chilling disregard for the sanctity of human remains. The result was a macabre artifact, a grotesque effigy that retained the semblance of the emperor's form. Stuffed with straw and adorned with mock imperial regalia, it was a cruel parody of the man who had once ruled Rome. This skin trophy, as Persian chroniclers called it, was displayed in the grandest temple of Ctesiphon, a place of pilgrimage and power. Suspended above the sacred fire altar, it hung like a specter, its empty eyes staring out over the gathered crowds. The temple, a marvel of Persian architecture, with its soaring arches and intricate mosaics, became a stage for Shapur's ultimate triumph. Every visitor to the Persian court, ambassadors, traders, and vassal kings, was confronted with this chilling testament to Rome's defeat. The trophy was more than a relic, it was a diplomatic weapon, a visual declaration of Persian dominance that struck fear into the hearts of all who saw it. For the Persians, it was a symbol of divine favor, proof that Ahura Mazda had chosen Shapur to lead his people to glory. For foreigners, it was a warning. To challenge the hunter in the dark was to invite a fate worse than death. The psychological impact of the skin trophy extended far beyond its immediate horror. In Persian court ceremonies, it became a focal point, its presence woven into rituals that celebrated Sassanid supremacy. Priests offered prayers before it, nobles swore oaths in its shadow, and poets composed verses that likened Shapur's victory to the triumph of light over darkness. The trophy was not a static display, but an active element in Persian political and religious life, a constant reminder of the king's power. Its longevity is uncertain. Some sources claim it endured for decades, a fixture of Ctesiphon's temple, while others suggest it eventually decayed and its destruction marked by ceremonies as elaborate as its creation. Yet, even in its absence, the memory of the trophy lingered, a ghost that haunted the collective imagination of the ancient world. The ritual of horror was Shapur's masterstroke, a fusion of cruelty, religion, and politics that redefined the art of conquest. By flaying Valerian alive, he had not only ended a man's life, but had transformed his death into a myth, a story that would outlive both the emperor and his captor. The sands of Mesopotamia, stained with Roman blood, bore witness to a moment when the balance of power shifted, when the eagle of Rome was brought low by the lion of Persia. The echoes of Valerian's screams, preserved in the tales of those who watched, carried a message that would resonate for centuries.
No empire, no matter how great, could withstand the wrath of a king who wielded pain as a weapon and fear as a crown.
Chapter 5. The Legacy of Pain. The sands of Mesopotamia, stained with the blood of a fallen emperor, whispered a tale that would echo through the ages, a story carved not in stone, but in the collective soul of nations. In the aftermath of Emperor Publius Licinius Valerian's horrific death in 262 CE, the Roman Empire reeled, its heart pierced by a wound that no army could heal. The ritual flaying of Valerian, orchestrated by Shapur I, the hunter in the dark, was more than an act of cruelty. It was a seismic event that shattered Rome's myth of invincibility and reshaped the ancient world. The news of the emperor's fate, carried on the lips of refugees and the scrolls of Persian messengers, descended upon Rome like a storm, leaving behind a legacy of pain that would haunt the empire for generations. This was not merely the death of a man, but the birth of a legend, a cautionary tale that would transcend time and culture, warning of the fragility of power and the enduring cost of hubris. In Rome, the city that had once proclaimed itself eternal, the air grew heavy with disbelief and dread. The first whispers of Valerian's capture reached the capital months after the desert trap of 260 CE, brought by broken soldiers and terrified merchants fleeing the eastern provinces. Their tales were met with stunned silence, as if the very marble of the Forum refused to accept such a calamity. An emperor in chains, his body desecrated, his skin displayed as a trophy in a Persian temple. These were images that defied comprehension. The Senate, cloaked in its ancient dignity, scrambled to suppress the most gruesome details, fearing the chaos that truth would unleash. Yet the truth, like a river breaching its banks, could not be contained. The streets of Rome buzzed with horror, the marketplaces filled with whispers of a king who had turned an emperor into a footstool, a ruler who had flayed Rome's pride alive. Gallienus, Valerian's son and co-emperor, stood at the heart of this maelstrom, his throne overshadowed by his father's shame. Tasked with holding together a fracturing empire, he faced an impossible dilemma. To acknowledge the loss of Valerian was to risk undermining his own legitimacy, yet to ignore it was to invite distrust. Imperial propaganda spun a fragile web of lies, portraying Valerian as a martyr who had died defending Rome's honor, his sacrifice a beacon of courage. But the tales of his servitude, of his screams beneath Persian blades, seeped through the cracks of this narrative, poisoning the empire's morale. Gallienus, his face etched with grief and resolve, issued decrees of mourning, his voice echoing through the Senate with calls for unity. Yet beneath his stoic facade, the weight of his father's fate pressed down, a shadow that darkened his reign. The psychological impact on Rome was immediate and devastating. The Eastern legions, those who had escaped the disaster in Mesopotamia, were shadows of their former selves, their fighting spirit broken by the knowledge that their emperor had been reduced to a plaything. Recruitment faltered as young men, once eager to don the eagle's crest, questioned whether Rome's military might was a myth exposed by Persian cunning. The empire's eastern provinces, stripped of their protector, fell into chaos, many slipping under Persian influence or outright control. Syria, the jewel of Rome's eastern holdings, became a battleground, its cities plundered, its trade routes severed. The loss was not merely territorial, it was a hemorrhage of wealth and prestige, a wound that threatened to bleed the empire dry. Beyond Rome's borders, the news of Valerian's fate emboldened the empire's enemies. Germanic tribes along the Rhine and Danube, sensing weakness,
pressed their attacks with a renewed ferocity, their war cries echoing with the confidence of predators circling a wounded beast. African kingdoms to the south and nomadic confederations in the east recalculated their alliances, their emissaries whispering of a Rome that could no longer protect its vassals. Shapur's victory had done more than defeat an army. It had cracked the foundation of Roman authority, exposing its vulnerabilities to a world that had long trembled before its legions. Persian diplomats, their smiles sharp as daggers, rebuffed Roman attempts to recover Valerian's remains, each refusal a fresh humiliation that underscored Rome's impotence. Within the empire, the disaster fueled the fires of political instability. Rival claimants to the throne, sensing Gallienus's weakness, rose in rebellion, their banners proclaiming new emperors in provinces from Gaul to Egypt. The crisis of the 3rd century, already a tempest of civil war and economic collapse, intensified, its chaos fed by the specter of Valerian's degradation. The Senate, once a bastion of stability, became a battleground of factions, each seeking to exploit the emperor's fall for their own gain. The Roman people, accustomed to the transient reigns of soldier emperors, were shaken by the unprecedented nature of Valerian's fate. To lose an emperor in battle was one thing. To see him reduced to a Persian trophy was a wound that cut deeper than any sword.
The story of Valerian's death transcended the borders of Rome and Persia, spreading like wildfire across the ancient world. From the spice markets of India to the Silk Roads of China, from the steppes of the north to the courts of distant kingdoms, the tale of the Flayed emperor became a legend, a grim parable of power's fragility. Persian poets wove it into epic verses, their words celebrating Shapur as a divine avenger, a king who had brought low the arrogance of Rome. Roman chroniclers, their pens heavy with shame, grappled with the catastrophe, using it as a lesson in the dangers of overconfidence. Ammianus Marcellinus, writing a century later, described Valerian's fate as a mirror held before the empire's pride, a warning that no ruler, no matter how exalted, was immune to the caprices of fate. The legacy of pain extended into the cultural and religious spheres where Valerian's story took on new layers of meaning. In Persia, Zoroastrian priests enshrined the tale in their sacred texts, portraying Shapur's victory as a triumph of light over darkness, a divine judgment against the chaos of Roman ambition. The skin trophy, displayed in Ctesiphon's temple, became a relic of faith, its presence a testament to Ahura Mazda's favor. In Rome, Christian writers, gaining influence in an empire on the cusp of transformation, saw Valerian's fate as divine retribution for his persecution of their faith. His suffering, they argued, was a warning to those who defied the will of God. These competing narratives, woven into the tapestries of two civilizations, ensured that Valerian's story would endure, its echoes resonating in both sacred and secular realms. The legacy of Valerian's death reshaped Roman military and diplomatic strategy for generations. Future emperors, wary of repeating his fate, grew cautious about leading Eastern campaigns in person, preferring to delegate such perilous tasks to generals who could be sacrificed without imperiling imperial prestige. This shift marked a profound acknowledgement of Rome's limits, a humbling of an empire that had once believed itself invincible. The eastern frontier, once a symbol of Roman dominance, became a scar, a reminder of the price of hubris. Diplomatic overtures to Persia, once conducted with the arrogance of conquerors, took on a tone of caution as Roman envoys navigated the shadow of Valerian's humiliation. The story's influence stretched beyond the ancient world, its tendrils reaching into medieval Europe and beyond. Early Christian chroniclers, drawing on Roman accounts, used Valerian's fate to craft moral tales about the dangers of pride and the transience of earthly power. Renaissance artists,
rediscovering the classics, depicted scenes of his captivity in vivid paintings and sculptures, their works capturing the horror of his final moments. The image of the flayed emperor, his skin hanging in a Persian temple, became a symbol of human vulnerability, a reminder that even the mightiest could be reduced to nothing. Modern historians, sifting through the archaeological remnants of Rome and Persia, continue to uncover fragments of this story, from inscriptions in Ctesiphon to shattered Roman statues in Syria, each piece a testament to its enduring impact. The legacy of Valerian's pain is not merely historical, it is a meditation on the nature of power and the cost of ambition. Shapur's triumph was not just a victory over an emperor, but a masterstroke of psychological warfare, a demonstration that true conquest lies in the destruction of symbols. The hunter in the dark understood that by breaking Valerian, he could break Rome's spirit, turning a single man's suffering into a weapon that would outlast his reign. His screams, preserved in the tales of those who witnessed his death, became a chorus of warning, a reminder that power is a fragile thing, easily shattered by those who wield cruelty as a tool of statecraft. In the modern age, where empires have given way to nations and swords to diplomacy, Valerian's story retains its haunting relevance. The collision of civilizations, the transformation of individuals into symbols, the use of suffering as a political instrument, these are dynamics that persist, cloaked in new forms but no less potent. The temple in Ctesiphon, where Valerian's skin once hung, has long crumbled to dust, but the warning it embodied endures. The legacy of pain is a meditation before humanity, reflecting the thin veneer that separates civilization from savagery. The distance between a throne and a torture chamber, as Valerian's fate reminds us, is not measured in miles, but in the choices of those who wield power.